All right, folks, welcome in to Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over at Bet Online, number 38. I am your host, Ryan Blackburn at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, part of the Mile High Sports Podcast Network, and I am here in a different little setup, something that you're probably not expecting, but I'm here. On the other side, I'm in Bailey. Different little setup. Really cool, doesn't it? Players like when I support some of our in-person content. Gotta love it. Gotta love being a part of it. Hopefully I can do some stuff of actual NBA season. I like being in here and I like the feel of this studio. So maybe we could get something like that in the future. What's up, Cedric? Nice to see ya. Hopefully everything's all good. You say Mike is glitching. Do we think that is there any sound issues potentially, Danny? Okay. Perhaps it's internet issues. Hopefully it's not too bad. But no, we'll see what happens with it. But again, I'm your host, Ryan Blackburn. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Really appreciate all the love and support on the podcast. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you can. This pod, as you know, it is brought to you by our good friends over at Bet Online, the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can receive 50% off for your free bet of up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything from the Olympics to baseball to Formula One racing. Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. Head on over to their website today to get in on the action. Use promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. Bet Online, the game starts here. Okay. We're going to do some interesting things today. I wanted to talk about rotations today because that's, I think, what I'm most known for at this point in terms of talking about how the Nuggets are operating, what they're supposed to be doing. I'm going to talk about rotations. That's mostly in the second and third segment. But over the weekend, the Nuggets finished up their summer league stuff and wanted to at least cover that just from this perspective. Denver's got some things that they've got to figure out with the summer after summer league finished up. I just wanted to share. I wrote an article that posted earlier today on milehighsports.com. It talked about Deron Holmes, Julian Strawther, Jalen Pickett, Hunter Tyson, Trey Alexander, and PJ Hall. All six of those guys are on Denver's roster. All six of those guys, obviously, very important takeaways from each and every one of them. Deron Holmes was the most important one, to be clear, because Denver assumed that they would be getting a full season of Deron Holmes. Very excited to have him on their squad. Obviously, he tears his Achilles. That is going to be delayed until the 2025-2026 season, which sounds crazy when you say it that way. But he's going to need full 12 months of recovery in all likelihood. And not having him really changed the complexion of that summer league team. I've talked about this before. They didn't have any athleticism. They didn't really have any rim protection of any sort. So it fell to the other guys, especially Strawther, Pickett, Tyson, Alexander, and Hall, to really try to pick things up. Strawther looked the part. Strawther looked like he could play. And that was probably the main on-court takeaway that everybody should have. Julian Strawther looks like a player that can really help this Nuggets rotation next year. And that, to me, is the most important development from what I think everybody was expecting. Nobody really, you can't really just say that Julian was going to step into that rotation spot. You needed actually to have some confidence there. And I think Julian provided some of that. The way that he handled himself, the way that he handled the pressure, holding on to just being more efficient, being more effective, getting to the rim. I liked a lot of the things that he did. Still took a bunch of threes because that's what he's supposed to do as the main floor spacer, main shooter. But he was able to create shots for himself and others in some ways. And I think he can translate that to the NBA level. I don't see any reason why he can't. And that's probably the most important takeaway outside of what Deron Holmes had happened to him. But then you got to get more negative again, because Jalen Pickett and Hunter Tyson, I think, are the next most important takeaways from Summer League. Jalen Pickett, I don't know what happened. Like, there was at least some talk. Vinny Benedetto reported he heard from the Nuggets that Pickett was being held out to a sore groin, said that it popped up in that fourth game and maybe had impacted him a little bit. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what ultimately happens there. But played 9 minutes in that game, in game four, zeros across the board. Just doesn't really feel like it's going to work out for Jalen in Denver, which is tough because he's turning 25. He is a very important piece, or at least was a very important piece to what uh, Calvin Booth was trying to add to the team. And now you've got Russell Westbrook coming in, and it certainly feels like Jalen's just never going to play. At least with Hunter Tyson, you feel like there's a potential pathway to playing time if he can improve, but I still think that there are questions about Tyson and his ability to actually translate his game to the NBA level. I didn't really see anything from Summer League from him that said that he could play immediately. I thought that like the most important takeaway from him is he just doesn't look athletic enough defensively to really stick at the NBA level. The Nuggets know, like with the scheme that they've played, with they're going to play up to touch with Jokic, they're going to sometimes blitz, sometimes do things where you've got to be athletic and aggressive on the weak side with your defense. You've got to be able to rotate quickly. And Tyson just wasn't able to do that. Tyson was absolutely late on some closeouts, late on some rotations. And if I believe in his shooting, there's no doubt about that. But if shooting is all he can do, then there are going to be some issues. He's got to do more than that. He's got to be more than that. And if you're the Nuggets, you don't necessarily feel like you saw much more than that, in my opinion. There were some passes that he made, like just some smart plays. And it's pretty clear, like I'm not grading him on his ability to be a primary scorer. Like that's not what I was thinking from him. But he's got to be able to guard. And I didn't see enough of that from an athletic perspective. But the one important one that I think makes up for some of the disappointments from Pickett and Tyson was Trey Alexander, who's currently slated to be a two-way for the Nuggets. He's currently like probably not going to play in the NBA season. But you never know. You never know because he showed, I think, a skill set that deserves to be developed. I don't know whether like he's still, I think, younger than both Pickett and Tyson. And he's got that kind of a game that if allowed to grow, then you've got a scorer and a defender and a bit of a playmaker. And he's a guy who was getting on the glass, rebounding a little bit, not letting himself be uninvolved in the play on either end of the floor. And he made an impact. He was very, very good. He was a player that I think the Nuggets knew that they liked, knew that he could be impactful, and he proved that. He proved that over and over and over again. I don't think he had a bad game. Like Trey Alexander going 5 for 5 on games played in Summer League is really, really tough to do, especially for a rookie. So very, very impressive stuff from him. I think that he can play. I think he's an NBA player. And whether he actually fits into the rotation or not, probably not. But you just never know. You never know. Good to see Grace is in here. Good to see Matix is in here. Hello, everybody. Thanks for stopping by. PJ Hall is the final one, by the way. PJ Hall, I think, is probably just a G League center at the end of the day. I don't expect him to be this massively impactful Nuggets backup, but there is a skill set there. And like, I'm not going to write it off entirely because I think that if he shoots well and if he's a smart defender, then there is always going to be a market for that. Think about a guy like Mike Muscala or the name comes to mind, Pero Antic from back in the day for the Atlanta Hawks. You remember the 2013-14 Hawks, 2014-15? He was one of their backups behind Al Horford and Paul Millsap and spaced the floor despite being undersized. Clearly, there is a place for a center that can shoot threes. Hall did not shoot efficiently, but he was confident with his shots. He shot over 80% from the free throw line. I think it's pretty clear that he will eventually become a three-point shooter, but Denver's going to need time to season that and some G League reps. He is the perfect candidate to be the starting center for the Grand Rapids Gold, and then learn how to play make, learn how to pass, learn how to shoot. Like, he already knows how to do all these things already, but to be requisitely good for the NBA level, I think that there's something that he can learn there for sure. So we will see what ultimately happens with him, but those six, you've got Deron Holmes, Julian Strawther, Jalen Pickett, Hunter Tyson, Trey Alexander, and PJ Hall. Like, they're going to be on the roster, or at least on a two-way. And the problem that the Nuggets ran into this last year was they did not have enough players that could play when it came down to it. Really, it was like 9. And I look at the roster right now, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do the rotation charts and just kind of talk and build out some rotations, was because I still think that Denver's got that issue. I still think that Denver doesn't have enough playable bodies in the NBA playoff picture. And that's a problem. That's obviously something that they've got to work through, and they've got to figure out what they're supposed to do with that. So there's probably some moves to be made still. But the 6 that I mentioned, obviously Deron Holmes is going to be out. But is there a possibility that those other 5 could play in a playoff setting? Who knows? Let's take a break. When we come back, we are going to chat about we're going to do the rotations. We're going to build out some 2024-25 lineups to help the Nuggets become NBA champions once again. If you will, make Denver Nuggets champions again. That would be great. We will be right back on Pickaxe and Roll. Not that one. Here we go. And we're back. Pickaxe and Roll. Ryan Blackburn here. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Appreciate all the love and support on the podcast, everybody. If you can, it'd be awesome if you could rate, review, and subscribe. If you're listening on the audio side, if you're watching on the video side, you'll see, hey, I'm in studio. I've got Jokic over there. Got a guy that I played with for 3 years, Christian McCaffrey, down there. I can actually say that. That's always fun. Nobody ever believes me, by the way, but it's crazy. I made Danny laugh behind the camera. Okay, let's get into it. Like and subscribe, would really appreciate it. We just cracked 8.7K subscribers on the YouTube side of things, and I want to get to 10K by the time the NBA season starts, and I think that we can do that. So with your help, I think that we can make it happen. Okay. If you know me, you know that I do things like this. The rotation charts, the lineups that show up, and I post every halftime, after every game for the Nuggets. I like to post these rotation charts and do things where people can then visualize who played on the floor, what worked, what didn't. Like, wow, crazy that Bruce Brown played 35 minutes in that game despite coming off the bench. But those were the kinds of insights that you're hopefully getting from something like this. And then you could see that Michael Malone played him 17 or 18 minutes in a row, and you're like, oh, no wonder he was tired at the end of that game. That makes sense. But this is, I think, pretty helpful. And so I come up with these lineups. I come up with these rotations. One of them was the full hockey sub idea. One of them was a heavy stagger idea. If you want to pause, then you can definitely check some of these out. This is an MPJ plus bench idea. But the most important thing in figuring out all of this is how the Nuggets are going to build their rotation, build their lineups in 2024, 2025. Because Michael Malone will be the first to admit that things did not work out in 2024. Coming off of a championship, it's pretty tough. It is not easy to win a championship again. Denver had their run in 2023. Things broke right for them. And now it's on the entire team, not just Malone, not just Jokic, not just Murray, whoever. It's on the entire team to try to figure out how best to build chemistry and camaraderie and effectiveness on the way to the playoffs in 2025. because the biggest takeaway from last year was that Denver didn't have enough of that. Didn't have enough trust. Didn't have enough reason to actually go to other lineups. Like Christian Brown was the main sixth man off the bench last year, and he was fine. He was fine. But he wasn't perfect. He wasn't a guy that you were like, okay, we need to get Christian Brown on the floor right now because he's going to really like change the game for everything. He was solid within his role. And now the Nuggets are hoping that he can evolve that into a starter mentality. Reggie Jackson, I think people were dreading in a lot of ways for when he would actually get on the floor. And then Denver would kind of have to figure out how to navigate that. Same thing with Zeke Naji for a lot of the season. DeAndre Jordan, anytime that Denver tried to use a backup center, frankly. Now it's the job of Michael Malone and the staff to build rotations, to build lineups that make sense for the entire team, that makes sense for not just in the short term in terms of winning games, but to win in the long term, to develop that playoff level chemistry, and to make sure that the Nuggets have every answer to any question that they face. Because that's what they had in 2023, and they've got to find a way to recreate that. That's the entire goal of what they've done. So, how do you go about it? What do you do? My impression on how to start with this, the pick and roll with the 1 and the 5 is sort of how Denver defines what they're supposed to be doing. Jokic and Murray, Russell Westbrook, and Dario Saric. Those are going to be the pillars, I think, for the most part of what the Nuggets do and how they're building lineups. What Denver does in the middle of those guys, the 2, the 3, the 4, that's going to really determine how lineups come to be, at least at the start. So around Jokic and Murray, who are the 2, 3, and 4 that make the most sense? Well, you need defense, you need floor spacing, you need athleticism. Which 2, 3, 4 brings those traits collectively the best? It's probably the starters. It's probably Christian Brown, Michael Porter, Aaron Gordon. It's one of the reasons why Michael Porter and Aaron Gordon are paid the way that they are. And it's one of the reasons why everybody's very, not afraid, but at least a little bit apprehensive at the idea of Christian Brown evolving into that from KCP. Because KCP was so great in this role last year, especially in the regular season, that there's some apprehension that Christian Brown could do that. I think that he can. I think that it's time, but I can understand why people are apprehensive. Now, what about the bench? Who are some guys off the bench that make the most sense next to Jokic and Murray? Well, Julian Strawther stands out for the spacing aspect. Peyton Watson for defense and athleticism. And then maybe go one of Dario Saric or not Russell Westbrook, probably Vlatko Cancar. That's the one that I think makes the most sense. But it's also kind of shaky because, like, is Dario too big to play next to Jokic? Is he too slow? Is Vlatko going to be ready? Zeke Naji, he played backup center last year. Is the team going to trust him again to try to do that? To try to play backup power forward? Who knows? There are some blended lineups I think Denver could go to. I like Julian Strawther, Peyton Watson, and one of Michael Porter or Aaron Gordon. I think that makes sense, where you get basically your 6th and 7th man, or at least your 2 young guys that are young wings, and then play them next to one of the other starting wings, and then Jokic and Murray. And then maybe a surprise trio that people might not really expect. What about Trey Alexander, Christian Brown, and Zeke Naji next to Jokic and Murray? I'm going to predict that lineup gets 0 minutes this year because that's probably not going to happen. But I think that Trey Alexander has the capability to play next to Murray immediately. Anybody can play next to Jokic. If you can't, then you're a bum. And then Christian Brown, I think, makes sense as kind of a defensive wing next to those guys. The real kicker here is Zeke. And I'm trying to figure out how best to build lineups and whether they should or should not include Zeke Naji, because Zeke kind of burned Denver last year. It wasn't by choice. Like, he wasn't trying to play badly, but he just didn't have a lot of confidence. He wasn't shooting well. He wasn't fitting in well. Is there a way for him to be reconnected with what the Nuggets are supposed to do? Because the Nuggets, like he's their 5th highest paid player right now. Like, you've got Jokic, Murray, Porter, Gordon, and Zeke Naji. Like, those are your 5 highest paid players on the team. So you'd like to find a way, especially with Zeke being locked in for the next 4 years, if you're not trading him, you'd like to find a way for him to play. He can't just be a player that sits on the pine for the entire time, right? So, how do you find a way to make it work? Playing next to Jokic and Murray may not be the worst idea in the world. He had a lot of pressure on him last year being the main pivot point on a bench lineup that featured Jamal Murray and 3 other bench guys. Not necessarily great. Not an easy situation for Zeke Naji to be in. So, who knows? Maybe he could recover. But what about Russ and Dario Saric? What do they need versus what Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic need around them? Well, Russ, very much a driver. He needs floor spacing around him. He needs somebody who can take some pressure off of him from being a floor spacer. He also needs some secondary ball handling next to him because you don't want Russ dominating the ball the entire time. That is one of the ways that Russ kind of self-combusts a little bit when he has all of the responsibility on his shoulders. You want somebody to be able to take on, like, let's say Russ has the tougher offensive assignments where the main defensive guy is like guarding him. Why not get off the ball a little bit, get into the short corner a little bit, or maybe set some screens and have somebody else run some offense? There is some ability there, so maybe secondary handling would be nice to have. And then you want defense and rim protection next to Dario Saric because he is slow, unathletic, and not a defensive guy. So which 2, 3, 4 brings the most for those traits? Could go back to the starters. What about Christian Brown, Michael Porter, and Aaron Gordon next to Russell Westbrook and Dario Saric? I think that's kind of interesting. It's kind of fascinating to think about. What if Denver was to play Jokic and Murray for the first 10 minutes of every quarter, like every first and third quarter? And then Christian Brown, Michael Porter, and Aaron Gordon came back in to start the second and fourth quarter and played with the other 1 and 5. Kind of fascinating to think about. It's not something Denver's ever tried before because Michael Malone's never really wanted to get that creative with that kind of a rotation. But he's going to have to get creative this year because Denver's got some answers or some questions that they need to answer. Then the main bench guys, you've got Julian Strawther, Peyton Watson, and one of Vlatko Cancar or Zeke Naji probably as your primary bench guys next to Russ and Dario. I think that Julian is actually, like, based off of what I'm looking at here, Julian Strawther makes a lot of sense. Next to Russell Westbrook, you want somebody that can take the pressure off of him from an offensive perspective, space the floor, and then just run in transition a little bit. Julian will definitely do that. I could see Russ pushing the floor in transition and kicking out to Julian Strawther on the wing for a deep 3. That could be part of Denver's offensive attack for sure. What about a blended lineup that features Julian Strawther, Michael Porter, and Peyton Watson? You've got Strawther, Porter, and Saric who are spacing the court, while Peyton Watson's not necessarily a great spacer, but him and Russ together with 3 other spacers around them, I could see that working. And then another surprise group. I think that Aaron Gordon and Dario Saric makes a lot of sense in the same ways that Jokic and Gordon makes sense from an offensive perspective and defense perspective, frankly. Like, Saric is a smart defensive player, just not an athletic one. Could Aaron Gordon help him out in the same ways that he helps Jokic? Maybe so. So you add Gordon into that, you add Strawther into that, and then you throw in Trey Alexander as an additional ball handler, an additional creator. See that working too. So, natural lineup combos that make the most sense, obviously. Everybody knows about Murray, Gordon, Jokic, and some shooting. That's what Denver's starting lineup was last year with KCP and Michael Porter. Could do the same thing with Julian Strawther and Michael Porter this year. Christian Brown's got to grow into a shooter for sure. He is not a shooter now. He's got to be a shooter going forward. And then Russell Westbrook, Julian Strawther, Dario Saric. That to me is like probably your primary bench trio, which actually kind of leaves out Peyton Watson, although he to me makes sense as well, just in a slightly different way. He and Russell Westbrook, it's going to be a tough fit. Like, you're going to need more shooting around those guys. And so that's why I built that blended lineup. But if it's not as many shooters around those guys, it's going to be kind of a tough sell. My single favorite group is Jamal Murray, Julian Strawther, Peyton Watson, Michael Porter, Nikola Jokic. You've got your two young wings next to your three stars. And like I could include Aaron Gordon into that, but I think that the fit between Watson and Gordon, like I want to see it going forward, but I think it's going to be kind of iffy. So you want to see it to see if it can develop, to see if Peyton can shoot a little bit, but I just kind of feel like teams are going to sag off of everybody except for Murray and Jokic in those situations. And it could be very difficult for Denver to space the floor like that. But I could absolutely see Jokic, Strawther, Murray, Porter, and Watson. I think that lineup makes a lot of sense. And then the other lineup, the ideal bench lineup, Russell Westbrook, Julian Strawther, Michael Porter, Peyton Watson, Dario Saric. 9-man rotation. I put it up, and I'll put it up on the screen once again. This potential MPJ plus bench lineup where you've got MPJ staggering, and then you've got other guys kind of filling in the gaps. That way, Michael Malone can do basically what he likes to do, where you have one starter and 4 bench players off the bench most of the time when Jokic isn't out there. It's not great, but I think that fits a little bit better than the idea of Russ and Jamal Murray together. We'll talk about that in the next segment. There's a lot to talk about there for sure. When we come back, we're going to go over some questions that I have for Michael Malone and some questions that the Nuggets are going to need to answer going forward for the season to win a championship. We will be right back on Pickaxe and Roll. All right. Final segment, Pickaxe and Roll. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Appreciate all the love and support on the podcast as always, folks. Like to be in the studio. Let's see if we could do this again going forward. I'd like to do this on a more semi-regular basis. So, Danny, let's just make it happen, dude. let's make it happen. I know you're busy as hell. Let's just make you even busier. That sounds like a plan. For those that don't know, Danny Bailey's been our main producer at MHS for a long ass time and is here from sun up to sundown. And I've kept him past sundown now, or like, I guess it's the summer, so it's a little bit different, but good Lord, does it, like I'd like to be in this kind of a studio. Although I did talk to Anilo earlier about potentially getting some of those boards that like actually those up there, those like you can't really see them on the camera, so it's fine. Don't worry about it, audience. But I'm just talking to Danny right now. I'm gonna get the Jokic one and the Murray one just to have in my office. So we'll make sure to get that and make it happen. Okay. I've got some questions, as everybody probably does too. I've got some questions. The first one is, as I shared a bunch of those different kind of lineup variations, those rotation charts. Is Michael Malone going to do hockey subs? Is he going to stagger one starter? Is he going to stagger multiple starters? How's this going to work? What got Michael Malone and the Nuggets in trouble this last year was relying too heavily on the starters to be great. And the reason why that happened was not because he played a 10-man rotation or a 9-man rotation or 8-man rotation or whatever. It's the combinations that he went to within the game where, hey, all reliable is just going back to the starting unit that won you a title, and you lose Bruce Brown, who was kind of your go-to, let's change things up, let's figure it out, let's kind of play with the variations of this group rather than have 6 guys that you could kind of vary things up. You've just got 5. So Denver far and away last year had the most minutes played of any 5-man unit. And that's a problem. It's of course a problem. Denver's top 2 lineups, I've shared this before. I think the number was 1,400 minutes for their top 2 lineups, their top 2 5-man lineups. The next highest team was like 800 or 900 or something like that. It was absurd, patently absurd. And that is a Michael Malone and a rotation decision thing. It is not about the roster that's being built. It's not about who Michael Malone had. These were active choices. This was something that Michael Malone could choose to change, and he decided not to. He fell back on old reliable, and then when the Nuggets starters struggled in the playoffs this last year, obviously Denver didn't really have that much of an answer for it because Peyton Watson didn't really play on the floor going forward and or like in the second round especially, and Christian Brown played less and less. Actually, he was fine, but Justin Holiday played more than so many other guys did, and that's fine because Justin was very good for the Nuggets. It wasn't about him. It was about the fact that Denver never tried out any of these lineups during the regular season at all. And so that was where the downfall really started to happen. So, what is the plan going to be? Is Michael Malone going to hockey sub, which is basically 5 starters go out, 5 bench players come in? Is he going to stagger 1 starter, which he normally likes to do? Last year was Jamal Murray, and usually it is Jamal Murray most of the time. Or is he going to stagger multiple starters and kind of change things up and maybe break up some of those rotations a little bit? Michael Malone likes to have longer stretches of time where guys play at the very least 6 or 7 minutes every single time they go out on the floor, unless you're playing horribly. Other teams don't do that all the time. Other teams will play in 3, 4, 5-minute bursts, and some teams will play extended periods of time. But Denver shouldn't have that excuse because their lineup sucked. Like their bench was just not good for pretty much the entire time. So Denver's got to figure that out. They got to be better. Number 2, how many minutes can or should Christian Brown actually play? 15.5 minutes per game as a rookie, 20.2 minutes per game last year. So he played 15, then he played 20. Right now, like KCP played 31 in both seasons that he was the starting shooting guard for Denver. Does that mean that Christian Brown's going to play 31 minutes a game? That seems kind of wild. That seems like a very large jump for somebody that hasn't really proved it that much. I don't think that Christian Brown's going to play that much, but the question is whether he's going to play 22, 25, 28, or 31. Like, and those are very different in terms of what kind of lineups you're building, how much other guys are playing. Like, is there a reason that Christian Brown should play more than Peyton Watson? Is there a reason that Christian Brown should play more than Russell Westbrook? What about Julian Strawther? Like, there's questions that Michael Malone and the Nuggets are going to have to answer, and Christian Brown is going to have to answer himself too. Like, he's going to have to earn it. I have zero doubts that a lineup that features Jokic, Murray, Porter, and Gordon is going to be really, really, really good. Is Christian Brown like he's the right guy that kind of fits into that in the 5-man, but I think other guys could also fit into it pretty well too. Like, could you see Peyton Watson filling that role? Sure. Could you see Julian Strawther? Absolutely. Justin Holiday, he's not on the team anymore, but yeah. Russell Westbrook, I think that Russell Westbrook could make it work. I don't think it's going to be as good as what Christian Brown would be because they've got a specific need, but I think that there are other players that could play pretty well within that rotation. Number 3, who is the 6th man? Like, who is it actually? Is it going to be Russell Westbrook, who you're signing to a minimum contract? Is it going to be Peyton Watson, who I think you're going to try to develop? Julian Strawther? Julian Strawther played 500 minutes last year. That seems kind of wild. Personally, I think it's time for Peyton Watson to play as much time with Jokic as possible. But the way that Denver does their rotations, and with as penciled in as Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter are, it's hard for me to find a bunch of time for Peyton Watson when building out a rotation chart unless he plays the 2, which I know Wipo loves to call Peyton Watson a shooting guard. He's not a shooting guard. He doesn't shoot. Like, that's a very, very important asset for shooting. Like this, like, you're comparing him more to a Herb Jones or Andre Roberson at that point, and that is entirely dependent on whether he can shoot. Herb Jones figured out how to shoot and was a shooter this last year. Peyton Watson's got to figure that out if that's what he wants to actually be. But that's why you got to play them together. That's why you got to develop some confidence there. Number 4, is the Jamal Murray stagger still a thing? Like, is that a thing that we're still doing right now? I don't like it. Haven't liked it that much at all. Michael Malone has consistently gone to it because Jamal Murray is the second best player, and usually your second best player should be the guy that carries the minutes that the first best player doesn't have to play. And that seems pretty reasonable. For sure. Like, it seems pretty reasonable. But the way that Denver's bench lineup was last year, like, it left Murray out to die, like the way that it was constructed. You're playing him next to Reggie Jackson, Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, and Zeke Naji. That was not good. Will it be better with Russell Westbrook, Dario Saric, Julian Strawther, and Peyton Watson? Probably. I think that's a better lineup for Murray. Is it the best lineup? Is it the best lineup that Denver can throw out there? Me personally, I think that Michael Porter fits better with that quartet specifically. Russ, Strawther, Watson, Saric. And those are the four guys that you're expecting to play, right? Like, if you're building a 9-man rotation for the playoffs, it's those four guys that are most likely to play. Do you want to put the burden on Murray to try to also help that lineup out? Like, is there a reason for that? Why not just play him next to Jokic? I think that's perfectly reasonable. And for Porter, his skill set, he's not going to be holding onto the ball that much either. Like, he's honestly just going to let Russ and maybe Julian Strawther a little bit, maybe Peyton Watson a little bit, create some things. I think that's completely reasonable, but not if Murray is out there. Like, Murray and Russ kind of going back and forth. That's my next one. Number 5, can Russ and Jamal actually play together? I don't know. We'll have to cross that bridge when we come to it. I think in theory they can, but it involves Jamal getting off ball a lot more. And he can do that. He's done that with other guys, Monte Morris being one of them. He did get off the ball for Bones Highland a little bit. Bones just didn't really justify being off the ball that much. And there are some other configurations that have worked like that. But Russ, like, probably needs the ball in his hands to be most functional, at least the majority of the time. So we'll see if that sticks together. What about Russ and MPJ? Kind of following up. I think that in a lot of the same ways that I was talking about Julian Strawther fitting really well with Russell Westbrook, I think that Michael Porter can do the same thing. You want Russ driving the paint. You want him driving in transition. You want him creating open jumpers for other guys. That is a skill set that he has that Jamal doesn't really have as much. That's because Russ has been doing it for eons. In the guy that's like taking all the attention, kicking out to other players. That's a good skill. It's a very important skill to have. Whether it actually makes sense, whether it actually works, I don't know. But I do think in theory that Russ and MPJ can play together, which should lend a lot of people to think that that Michael Porter should be the one to stagger as opposed to Murray. Now, Murray is a good spot-up shooter as well. Don't get it twisted. Like, Murray can spot up, and he's a pretty awesome spot-up shooter when he wants to be. MPJ is one of the best in the league. Like, there is a difference there, I think. Can Jokic and Dario play together? This is one of those ones that Denver didn't really play. Like, they don't really have a backup center often that plays well with their starting center. Think about the way that Jokic played with Mason Plumlee. That was pretty solid. Jokic and Isaiah Hartenstein, they never played together. Jokic and JaVale McGee, no. Jokic and Boogie Cousins, no. Jokic and Zeke Naji, well, Zeke used to be a power forward, so kind of it should have worked in theory, but it actually was horrible in practice. What about Jokic and Dario? Are they athletic enough that they could actually make that work? I don't know. They are certainly smart enough and skilled enough to be able to make it work. And I think that some of the, like, coming off of the Olympics for both of them, I know that Croatia didn't ultimately make it, but I wonder if those guys, with the way that FIBA ball is generally played, just kind of letting that kind of bleed into the NBA season. I think the Joker and Dario, especially early on, could probably create some interesting offense. Dario really struggled against, like, he really struggled again or for the Warriors in the latter half of their season. And I wonder if he got tired out. I don't actually know what the story was behind that. But taking advantage of Dario while he is, like, good and available, and he shot 41% from 3 through January 31st last year. Like, take advantage of that while it's there. Like, he could potentially be a good asset for Denver. And then number 8, last one. How many players can play? This is the question that I kind of ended the second segment on. How many players for the Nuggets can actually play in a regular season environment and a playoff environment? The Nuggets at this point are, yes, the Mile High Sports account is sharing in the commentary right now. Thanks, Anilo. If it is Anilo, maybe it's my boss, Nate. That's pretty funny. 9 player rotation for the most part. That's what Denver would really count on in a playoff scenario. 10-man rotation at the beginning of the regular season. But I think you could see that the top 9 is pretty well defined. You've got the starters, including Christian Brown, and then you've got Russell Westbrook, Peyton Watson, Julian Strawther, Dario Saric. Those are your top 9. Who's the 10th man? Is it Vlatko? Is it Zeke? Maybe Hunter Tyson sneaks in there, like providing a little bit more spacing. Maybe Trey Alexander surprises everybody and you need another guard out there to really create a little bit. I could see something like that happening and people would be like, whoa, what in the world? Trey Alexander can play. Or do you need a big? Like, do you slide Dario over and you play Zeke Naji a little bit next to him? Do you play DeAndre Jordan a little bit? That doesn't feel tenable. Doesn't seem like the thing that everybody would be expecting to work. But how many of those other guys, like whether it's newcomer Spencer Jones, who just signed a 2-way with the Nuggets, or he hasn't actually officially signed, but he's going to, from Stanford, rookie, PJ Hall, Trey Alexander, Deron Holmes is obviously on the shelf, Hunter Tyson, Jalen Pickett, DeAndre Jordan, Zeke Naji, Vlatko Cancar. How many of those guys do you feel comfortable playing in the playoffs? Could they? Is it reasonable to ask them to play in the playoffs? Like high intensity basketball? I don't know. This guy's got to prove it a little bit. Got to figure it out. Like of those guys, it could be Vlatko, probably the most likely. Second most likely, honestly, might be Trey Alexander, which people are going to laugh at. They're going to be like, what in the world are you talking about, Ryan? I'm calling my shot right now. I think that he is the second most likely player after Vlatko Cancar to be a playoff player for Denver. And that to me means that Denver's rotation is not good, or their roster is not good enough. Denver's got to have more guys that they can believe in that situation. You don't need that many more. You need 1, maybe 2. But somebody as simple as Justin Holiday, somebody as simple as I actually don't even remember who's on who's out there right now. Gordon Hayward, I think, is a free agent. Jay Crowder, I think, is a free agent. I would feel better if I were the Nuggets if I had one of those 2, Gordon Hayward or Jay Crowder, just on the pine. Like, they might not turn into anything, but those guys have actually played in the playoffs, have been successful in the playoffs, and maybe there's something to that. So I don't know. We will see, folks. We will see what happens, but I think that is going to do it. I think that's going to do it for this episode of Pickaxe and Roll, everybody. Brought to you by our good friends over at Bet Online. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Obviously, weird setup, but I'm in the studio. We'll try to do it a little bit more frequently. I think it makes sense. Shout out to DB behind the keys right there, behind the screen. He's wonderful producer for us here at Mile High Sports. Everybody, make sure to give DB some love. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button on the way out. We will talk to you guys very soon.